Is the recording?
Yes, Miss. I think somebody who's in the team started it.
Yeah, Vayun, who's in FRC, he started. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, can we start now?
Sir, I have a small question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, has the game been announced for this year?
So the game for this year will be announced tonight. So today is 12th of September, so the game will be announced tonight. So you'll have to check the exact timing. It will be maybe around 8 o'clock or so our time in the evening.
Okay, sir. So where should I check it? Is there any website or something?
Yeah, just search for First Tech Challenge on Google and you'll find the FTC website. And over there you'll find the link to the entire event. So it's a proper event that happens when the game is launched, and it will be a live streaming event. You'll have to join that and you can see.
I will send you the links. I'll be putting the link in all the groups.
Okay, miss. Thank you.
Okay, so continuing from our previous sessions, today we'll be talking about sensors and then we'll move on to building the actual robot. And as always, we'll have the knowledge game in the last 10 minutes of our session, where we'll all come to know how much you've been paying attention and whether you've been really listening to what I've been sharing with you all. So it'll be a very fun game. I'm sure most of you have attended these sessions in the past and you know what this game is about. So let's get started. So we were talking about the control system last time, and one of the items that remains in the control system are the sensors. So in FTC, there are various kinds of sensors that are allowed on your robot. So these are the kinds of sensors. So you have a proximity sensor, you have a distance sensor, a light sensor, a color sensor, sound sensor, and a touch sensor. So these are the most commonly used sensors, and every year the competition keeps on adding a few more sensors. So you'll have to check the exact rules of this year's game to find out if any new sensor has been added. But these are the most commonly used sensors. So we'll take a look at each of these sensors in a little bit of detail.
So
Yes.
So can we add, like, can we have more sensors other than this in the?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can, as long as they meet a certain criteria. So for instance, if you're using a control hub or an expansion hub, then the sensor should be able to communicate with that. And not all kinds of sensors will be able to communicate with the expansion hub or the control hub. So
Yes,
that is
sir.
the criteria that FTC has put. So when you read the game manual, they have listed down all the allowed sensors and the sensors that are not allowed. There's a complete list over there. So
Okay, sir.
if you go over that, you'll come to know what is allowed, what is not.
So because I have a lot of sensors in my home.
Very likely you'll not be able to use those sensors unless they are I2C sensors. So the Rev Robotics control system uses I2C protocol for communication between sensors and the hub. And most sensors that you have at home, the Arduino ones or the Raspberry Pi ones, they
Yes,
do
sir.
not work on I2C.
Oh, okay, sir. So I have all these sensors also, like, on the screen.
Okay. So the ones that I'm showing on the screen, so for example, this picture that you see here, this is a very commonly used Arduino sensor. I just put it as a representative picture, but the actual sensor that you will need to use, that will look it'll look somewhat different. So I have pictures of those as well. So don't go just by these pictures, and some of these sensors will not be allowed in FTC because they're not based on the I2C protocol. So let's begin with the proximity sensor. So as the name suggests, what the sensor does is it detects proximity to objects in front of the sensor. So for example, if you're navigating your robot on the play field and you want to stop when you encounter a certain obstacle in front of you. And so when you put the sensor in front of the robot, this sensor will keep checking if there is an obstacle in front of it. And if the obstacle appears in front of it, say within a few centimeters, say 5 centimeters or 8 or 9 centimeters, then the sensor sends a signal to the hub saying that I have detected an obstacle in front of me. So that's what the proximity sensor does. Now, these proximity sensors, besides being used in robots, they're also used in our daily life. So there are many scenarios in which we end up using proximity sensors, even though we might not know that we are actually using them. So can anyone tell me an example of a proximity sensor being used in daily life?
So our car, when we are reversing, it starts beeping when there is something near.
Yes, exactly a proximity sensor, but yes, that is a similar sensor. We'll talk about that particular sensor a little while later.
Our remote also.
So in the
Sorry?
glass sliding doors in malls, in the glass sliding doors, in malls.
Yes, the glass sliding doors in malls. So the moment you come in front of the door, it opens up. That's correct. Someone is saying
Sir,
about remote control.
TV remote also goes on the same principle, sir, of IR rays.
Yes. Yes, the principle is the same in a TV remote, but it doesn't work as a proximity sensor. So it doesn't actually sense proximity. It is a different field,
So,
but yes, principle is the same. Any other example?
so and also, can it also be in some wash basins? There's also a proximity sensor. So you have
Yes,
to
yes.
keep an
Yes, that is a very good example. So there are these wash basins that have automatic taps in them. So you just wave your hand in front of the tap and water starts flowing. That exactly is the proximity sensor. And there is one proximity sensor on your mobile device as well, on your mobile phone. Can anyone tell me what it is? What is it
Fingerprint?
used for on your phone?
Would it be camera? Face sensor.
Sorry, can you go one by one? I was not able to hear.
So when you're like on a call or something and you get the phone near your ear, it like just it becomes black on the screen.
Exactly. So near your earpiece of your mobile phone, there is a proximity sensor, and if you're on a call and you bring the phone to your ear, it turns off the screen because you accidentally don't want the screen to be touched. So yes, that is where the proximity sensor is used for. So this proximity sensor is based on infrared rays, and in this sensor there is a transmitter and there is a receiver. Yes. So if you look at this picture, there are two LEDs that are visible here. So there is this particular one. Sorry. So there is this particular one. This is the transmitter, and there is this dark colored one. This is the receiver. So what happens is the transmitter transmits infrared waves outward, and whenever there is an obstacle in front of the sensor, what happens is that obstacle reflects back some of that infrared light back to the sensor, and this receiver, it receives that infrared light, and on the basis of that, it is able to identify that there is an obstacle in front of it. So that's the basic principle behind this proximity sensor. The next sensor that we have is the distance sensor.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
so I have a small doubt. Is proximity sensor also used in some submarines and ships to check the depth and so?
So there are sensors used to check the depth, but they are not proximity sensors. See, proximity means the word proximity means near. So these sensors only work when you're very near the object. So that's what the meaning of proximity sensor is. So what you're talking about measuring the depth, that is called distance sensor, which is on the screen right now.
Okay, sir.
Did I hear any other question?
Yeah, I think I have another example for this. So like nowadays we have this automatic hand sanitizer. So when you put like your hand near it, it like just like outputs the sanitizer. So is that an example as well?
Yes, yes, that is also an example of a proximity sensor. Yes, so that is also something that we use in our daily life. So let's talk about the distance sensor now. Distance sensor also is based on a similar principle as the proximity sensor, but the job of a distance sensor is completely different. So the distance sensor doesn't tell you that there is an obstacle in front of you in your proximity. It tells you the distance to the obstacle in front of you. And that distance can be farther away. It need not be just a few centimeters. For example, the sensors that you see on the screen here, especially the ones on the right, that particular sensor uses ultrasonic waves, and it's able to detect obstacles all the way from say 10-15 centimeters to about 2.5 meters. So that's the range of that particular sensor. Again, this particular sensor also has two items in it. So there is this one mug T. So this particular item is the transmitter. So this transmitter transmits infrared waves, and this is the receiver. This receiver receives the reflected ultrasonic waves. Sorry, not infrared. This is based on ultrasonic. So it receives the reflected ultrasonic waves, and based on how much time that wave took to go from the transmitter to the receiver, it is able to figure out what is the distance of the obstacle in front of it. So this is the principle on which this particular sensor on the right works. And this particular sensor that you see on the left, this is a Rev Robotics sensor, and this is the sensor that you will get in your kit. And this sensor also is based on the same principle, except for the fact that instead of using ultrasonic waves, it uses lasers. So it sends out laser waves, and those laser waves, when they reflect and come back, the sensor is able to figure out how far the object is based on how much time that particular laser wave or the laser pulse took to reflect back from the obstacle and come back. So that is what this sensor does, and that's how it works. Now, can someone tell me in the animal kingdom, any animal that uses similar principles for sensing its environment and surroundings?
Bats.
Bat.
Yes, that's correct.
Dolphin.
Dolphins also, yes, but dolphins don't use it typically to find a distance. What they use it to communicate with other dolphins. But yes, there are some variety of fish that also use this as a sonar. So sonar is essentially this ultrasonic sensor that you see. So using sound waves, they're able to figure out how far are the obstacles in front of them. So yes, so these are some examples from the animal kingdom that use similar principles.
So I have a small question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So can a distance sensor do everything a proximity sensor can?
It can, theoretically it can do, but typically what happens is distance sensors are not very effective when your distance is very small. Especially the sensors that come on the Rev Robotics kit that come with the kit, they are effective only when your obstacle is at least 15-20 centimeters away from it. Then only they are very effective. So yes, theoretically distance sensor can do everything that a proximity sensor can do, but depending on the practical limitations of the sensor, you may not be able to use a distance sensor in all places where you want a proximity sensor.
Okay.
So moving on, this third sensor is the light and color sensor. So these are sometimes these are two separate sensors. You have one sensor for detecting light and the other for detecting color. So what the sensor for detecting light does is it measures the intensity of light. And the sensor that measures color, it tells you what color of light it is. In the Rev Robotics kit, the sensor that we have, so this particular sensor that you see here, this is a Rev light and color sensor. So this does both. So this has both the sensors inside it and will tell you not just the intensity of light, but the color of the light as well. Now what you see on the right here is the internals of this particular sensor. And the way this light and color sensor works is there is something called a photodiode in the center of the sensor. So this particular item that you see here, this is a photodiode. What a photodiode does is a photodiode is sensitive to the light that falls on it. So it is something called a photoreceptor cell, or if you compare it to a human, it is like the eye of the sensor or the retina of the sensor, which is able to actually detect the light that is falling on it. Now the problem with these light and color sensors is they are very sensitive to the lighting conditions. So for example, if you're in a dim, dark room, you may not be able to figure out the exact color of the object because the overall lighting is very low. Or if you are in a very brightly lit room and there is a lot of light falling on the object, then that object may appear white because it will end up reflecting all of the light instead of appearing of the actual color that it is. So there are these problems with light sensors and color sensors that they're sensitive to the lighting conditions. So these sensors, in order to eliminate these problems, what they do is they typically have their own light sources. So for example, these LEDs that you see here, these 4 LEDs, so they are 4 light sources. And when you turn on the sensor, these light sources, they light up and they throw light onto the object that is being sensed in front of the sensor. So that in most of the cases, there will be plenty of light falling on that object and the sensor will be able to detect what color or what is the intensity of light falling on it. So that is how this particular sensor works. Now, so this sensor does 2 things. It measures the intensity of light and it measures the color of light. Now in a human eye, can someone tell me what is it that measures the intensity of the light and what is it that measures the color of the light? So if there are any biology students, you should be able to say.
The pupil is the one that will measure the intensity of the light. So as the light increases, the pupil dilates and expands. And the color of the light, something on the retina, I'm not able to remember.
So pupil doesn't.
So there are cones that detect colors. The rods detect the depth and contour, and cones detect color, right?
Exactly. So that's the correct answer. So rods and cones are the two types of cells that are present on the retina. Rods are useful when you are in a low light and you want to see something in a very low light. So during low intensity of light, rods help out, and cones they help with color. So they tell you what color of the object it is. So the pupil, on the other hand, is not related to measuring the intensity of light or color of the light. What pupil does is it regulates the light amount of light going inside the eye. So if you're looking at a bright object, the pupil will close itself and leave a very small opening so that very little light goes in. That's the job of the pupil. So moving on, the next sensor is the sound sensor. Now a sound sensor again measures two things, intensity of the sound and frequency or wavelength of the sound. So that's what it measures. And a sound sensor typically consists of a microphone. So what you see here, this black object, this is the microphone. And this microphone picks up audio signals. It measures both the intensity and the frequency. And based on this, you'll get a lot of information about the sound that is there in your environment. For instance, if you have two musical instruments that operate on different frequencies, so for instance, if you have, say, maybe a violin that operates at a very high frequency, it emits a high frequency, high pitched sound, compared to maybe a piano that will be lower frequency, and you should be able to differentiate between these two musical instruments using this kind of a sound sensor. And same goes for a male voice versus a female voice. So male voices typically have lower pitch, lower frequencies compared to female voices that are of a higher frequency. So it's also possible to detect whether it's a man or a woman speaking by measuring the frequency of the sound. So that's the sound sensor. And finally, we have the touch sensor. So this touch sensor, as the name suggests, it detects touch. And when we say touch, this is not exactly the kind of touch that we are all used to. For instance, on a mobile phone screen or on your trackpad of your laptop. So this is not the kind of touch of that kind, because those kinds of touch are called capacitive touch. This particular touch sensor, what it does is it actually pushes a small switch, and based on that, it detects that the robot has touched something. So this is again the Rev touch sensor, and this white piece that you see here, this is an electrical switch, this particular white piece. And if you mount this particular Rev sensor on in the front of your robot, and this white switch, if it gets pressed by some obstacle, then that signal is sent to the hub, and the hub comes to know that there is an obstacle in front of you that has touched the robot. So like I said, this is an electrical switch, and it is not based on capacitive touch. And this is the simplest of all sensors, because this is just a very simple switch that connects and disconnects the flow of current inside the sensor. So it's a very simple sensor. So these are the sensors that are commonly used in FTC. Now, besides all this, there is also a video camera that you can use in FTC. So you're allowed to put one video camera on your bot, and you can connect it either to the control hub or to the Android device, the robot controller RC on your robot. And you can have appropriate programs written that can analyze the video feed that comes from that video camera. And based on that, you can take decisions. For instance, if you remember in the last or in the first session, I showed you the Skystone, that was a yellow block on which on one side of which there was a black sticker that was there. So these kind of objects can be detected using this video camera. So I'm not going to cover that as part of the sensors, even though it is actually a sensor. We will take a look at it when we do our programming, because that requires a lot of programming. It's not simple to use. So we will look at that in detail when we program our bot. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our sensors. If there is any question, I can take them now, or else we can proceed with the robot build. So when we build a robot, the first thing that we build is we build the wheelbase of a robot. So this is what. Sorry, is there a question?
Yes, I have a question. Suppose why do people use both the distance sensors and proximity sensors when a proximity sensor can basically do whatever a distance sensor can and more?
No, it's not. It's not that a proximity sensor can do everything that a distance sensor can. It's the other way around. A distance sensor can do everything that a proximity sensor can, but that is only theoretically. When you actually put it on a bot practically, then at smaller distances, your distance sensor doesn't give you really reliable readings. And a proximity sensor gives you more reliable readings at shorter distances. That is why you use proximity sensors for that purpose. So it's more of a practical decision rather than a theoretical decision. So as you build a robot, you'll realize that whatever you learn in theory, not all of it works exactly in real life. There are a lot of limitations and a lot of constraints that you need to get over, and you need to come up, with various alternatives like these. If a distance sensor is not working, use a proximity sensor. Sometimes we even use a light sensor if none of these two work, because a light sensor also tells you the color of the object in front of it. And if there is no object, it will probably tell you something like a gray color, which will probably be the color of your floor. And if that color changes from gray to something else, you can say that this is an obstacle. So that is another way of detecting an obstacle. Again, the purpose of that sensor is different, but you could use it for this purpose as well.
Okay, thank you.
So coming back to wheelbases, so this is how a wheelbase looks like. So the wheelbase is the basic platform on which your entire robot is built, and the primary job of a wheelbase is to provide locomotion. So it's basically something that moves the robot around. So obviously it has to have wheels and motors, and it also has a few more items. So we'll take a look at those. Let me switch over to the whiteboard. So a wheelbase has 4 components. The first component of a wheelbase obviously is the wheel or multiple wheels. The second component are the motors, because you need something to power the wheels. The third component is something called a drivetrain. Now, many people use the term drivetrain and wheelbase interchangeably, but they are not supposed to be used like that. So today we'll see what's the difference between a drivetrain and a wheelbase. So a drivetrain is only a part of a wheelbase. And the fourth item is called a chassis. So wheels. So we'll take a look at wheels in subsequent slides, because there are many kinds of wheels that are available for FTC. We'll take a look at those in detail. Motors, we know that DC motors are the ones that are suitable. We have seen it last time, because DC motors have a lot of power, a lot of torque. And for a wheelbase, you need a lot of power and a lot of torque, because your bot can be pretty heavy. You typically don't use servo motors unless you're building a very small, lightweight robot. For FTC, it's always DC motors. Okay, now when it comes to drivetrain, there are many options. Now, first of all, what is a drivetrain? So if you look at a robot, from a top view. So from the top, the robot will very likely have some kind of a rectangular frame like this, and there will be some wheels. So for instance, these two are the front wheels. So remember, I'm looking at this from the top. So these wheels will appear like this. These are the rear wheels. And then you have these motors that are mounted on the robots. So, and the motor has a shaft. So this motor has a shaft here. The wheel has a shaft somewhere here. Now the power has to be transmitted from the motor all the way to the shaft of the wheel. So whatever is used to transmit this power from the motor to the wheel shaft, that is called the drivetrain. And there are 4 types of drivetrains that are commonly used in robots. So the first one is called direct drive. So what a direct drive means is you have a motor, and you have a shaft sticking out from that motor. And what you do in a direct drive is you take a wheel and you mount the wheel directly onto the shaft of the motor. So this is your wheel, this is the motor. So this is your direct drive. The next item or the next option that we have for creating a drivetrain is using gears. So is everyone familiar with gears? I am hoping that everyone must have seen gears at some point or the other in their lives. So gears are basically those wheels that have tooths on them, that have teeth on them, And if you bring two gears next to each other, those tooths or those teeth, they mesh with each other, they interact with each other. And if you rotate one gear, the other gear also rotates. So gear is typically used to transfer rotation from one shaft to another shaft. So when you have gears, your drivetrain looks something like this. So this is your motor, and this is the shaft coming out of it. And this shaft, in case of a direct drive, we have seen that the shaft directly goes onto the wheel. In case of a geared drive, this shaft goes on a gear. So this is the gear on which it goes, and this particular gear would be meshed with another gear. So the tooth or the teeth of this particular gear will mesh with the teeth of this particular gear. And so if you rotate one gear, the other gear will also rotate. And this second gear will also have a shaft on it. And it is this shaft on which the wheel is connected. So the wheel is connected on this particular shaft. So this is a geared drive.
Sir, I have a doubt.
Yeah, tell me.
Sir,
So
can
using-
there be more than 2 gears?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Can there be more than 2 gears?
Yes, you can have as many gears as you want. It depends on your design, and the number of gears actually determine the kind of ratio you want between the speeds of the input shaft and the output shaft. It depends on that. It also depends on whether you want to reverse the direction of the output shaft as compared to the input shaft. So there are various parameters that determine whether you have to use 2 gears or 3 or 4 or how many gears. So you can use as many gears as you want. But keep in mind that the more gears you use, the more complex your design becomes, and the harder it becomes to build and maintain it. Did I hear another question?
Yeah, so isn't this like the mechanism of 2 gears also used in cycles, like bicycles? Like, I think I've heard of that.
Yes. So bicycles also have something called gears. So you can change the gear on a bicycle, but there are no actual gears that are present on a bicycle. So we'll come to the bicycle in a moment. So just hold on to that thought. So there are no gears in a bicycle. We'll take a look at it. So these are the gears. So before we proceed with the other types of drivetrains, let me do a comparison between the direct drive and the geared drive. And why do we use a direct drive and when do we use a geared drive? So direct drive, as you can see, the wheel is connected directly to the motor. So it's a very easy, simple design, very easy to build, and quickly you can build a robot using this particular design. That's the advantage of it. Compared to a geared drive or any other drivetrain, since you have to arrange multiple gears and each of those gears will have their own shaft, so it complicates things a little bit and there is a lot of maintenance involved. So your gears may become loose and your shaft may become loose and the gears may go out of mesh and so on. So those are the disadvantages of a geared motor, of a geared drivetrain. But the big advantage of a geared drivetrain is the motor is isolated from all the vibrations that come from the wheel. So look at it this way. In case of a direct drive, this is the wheel, and this wheel, when it rotates on the ground, when it rolls on the ground, it will face several obstacles. So you might have stones or other obstacles on the ground, and these obstacles cause the wheel to vibrate. And all these vibrations, they directly go to the motor, and the motor is a delicate electronic device. And if a lot of vibrations go into the motor, then over a period of time, your motor may get spoiled. So the motors also have a gearbox in them. Those gears will go out of mesh or they may get damaged and so on. So that's the disadvantage of a direct drive. In case of a geared drive, what happens is even if you have, say, small stones below the wheel that are causing vibrations, those vibrations are limited only to this particular shaft, this shaft that you see, on which the wheel and the first gear is mounted. These vibrations do not get transmitted from this gear to this gear. They do not get transmitted. And since they do not get transmitted to this gear, they don't end up in the motor. And so your motor will have a much longer life. So that is the advantage of a geared drive. Now, besides the geared drive, the third drive that we have is a pulley and a belt drive. I hope everyone knows what a pulley is. You must have studied in physics. So So a pulley and a belt drive looks something like this. So you have your motor, and this is the shaft, and there is a pulley on the shaft. So this is the pulley on the shaft, and there is another pulley a little farther away. This is another pulley, and this pulley is also on another shaft, and it is this shaft on which your wheel is connected. So this green is a wheel. And what you do is you have a belt running over from one pulley to the other. So as one pulley rotates, if this pulley rotates, this belt transfers that rotation to this pulley, and then this pulley also starts rotating. That causes this wheel also to rotate. So this is how power is transmitted using this pulley drivetrain. So this is the pulley drivetrain.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, is this present?
Can you repeat? Your voice is not clear.
Sir, is this present in the cycle?
In the cycle? No, this is not present in the cycle. Hold on for the cycle a little more while. So the next drivetrain that we have, that is the one that is there in cycles. Even though we call it a gear, it's not really a gear. So the last drivetrain that we have, the fourth kind of drivetrain that we have, that is called a chain and a sprocket drivetrain. This is what we have on a bicycle. So this looks something like this. You have a motor, you have a shaft coming out of it, and on the shaft you mount what is called a sprocket. So a sprocket is similar to gear. It also has teeth, but it has much bigger teeth like this. And those teeth are meant to go over a chain, and they're not meant to go mesh directly with another sprocket. So this is a sprocket, and then there would be another sprocket on which the wheel is connected. So this sprocket having a shaft on which you have a wheel. And this is also a sprocket. And finally, you have a chain that goes over these two sprockets. So this is what you have in a bicycle. So in a bicycle, there are two places where chains and sprockets are used. One is in order to, when you're pedaling the bike, so you're rotating a sprocket by your pedals. There's a big sprocket that you see. And whatever you call gears in a bicycle, that actually shifts your chain from one sprocket to another sprocket. So if you've actually seen the mechanism in action, how gears change on a bicycle, you will see that chain actually slipping from one sprocket to another sprocket. And by changing these sprockets on the fly, you're able to attain different speeds. So it's a chain and a sprocket system that you have on a bicycle. It's not a gear or a pulley. So in FTC, you have these four options. So pulley and belt was the third one, and the fourth one was chain and sprocket.
So which is the most recommended option to use?
Yes. So in terms of simplicity, direct drive is the easiest to do. So to begin with, I would suggest go with a direct drive, because without spending a lot of time on your drivetrain, you'll be able to get your robot up and running. And try it out for a while, see what kind of speed you're getting with the direct drive. And in case of FTC, the entire match happens on a foam tile field. So there aren't really stones and pebbles and lots of vibration on the field. So it doesn't cause a lot of damage to the motor. But if you're trying it out on some other terrain, then you might end up damaging your motor. So to begin with, I would suggest go with a direct drive. And once you are comfortable with the direct drive and you still want to make it better, you want to improve it, then you can go either with a gear drive or with a chain and sprocket. Those are the two options I would suggest. I wouldn't suggest pulley and belt, because in pulley belt, what happens is if the belt becomes loose for some reason, then the belt starts slipping over the pulley and you're not able to transmit power from one pulley to the other pulley. So pulley and belt are not really good for FTC purpose, but gears and sprockets are pretty good if you want to try out something more complex. So we'll be taking a look at some gear and sprocket drivetrains in a little while. So moving on, what is the chassis? So chassis is basically the structure on which all your wheelbase elements are mounted. So this rectangular frame that we saw, this particular rectangular frame, this is the chassis. So This chassis provides support to the wheels, to the motors, and to the drivetrain elements, and it gives us support and a platform for everything to be mounted on each other. So these are the 4 parts of a wheelbase. Now let's move ahead and take a look at the various types of wheels that are available. So we have 3 types of wheels that are popularly used in FTC. We have traction wheels, omni wheels, and mecanum wheels. We'll take a look at each of these in detail. So these are pictures of traction wheels. So traction wheels, as the name suggests, they provide a lot of traction to the robot on the ground. And these wheels, typically look like this. So they have a lot of rubber on them. So this particular wheel that you see, this is a rev traction wheel, and this has grooves on the tire like this. And these grooves look very similar to a tractor tire or a truck tire if you have seen them. So these provide a lot of traction. So these grooves, they dig into the foam and they give you a lot of traction. This particular traction wheel that you see, this is from GoBuilder. This is an advanced wheel. This is based on the rubber that is used in racing cars. So if you have seen racing cars and you've observed those wheels, one thing you'll notice is the racing car wheels, they don't have these grooves that you see in trucks and tractors. The wheel rubber is very smooth. It's a very slick rubber that you have, and that rubber is a special material. It gives you a lot of friction on the ground. So the GoBuilder wheel is based on that principle. And then these are Tetrix wheels that you see here on the left. These are similar to the rev wheels, except that they don't have those grooves. So those grooves are not present. And they are a good combination of rev and GoBuilder taken together. So these are the Tetrix wheels. So these are the traction wheels that you can use on your bot. The other kind of wheels that you can use are called omni wheels. So can anyone tell me what are omni wheels used for? So if you look at this omni wheel, you'll see that there are these small rollers all along the periphery of the wheel. So these are all rollers. These are present all along the wheel.
This can be used for changing for better turning.
Yes, it is helpful in turning. So what these rollers allow you to do is it allows you to do sideways movement. So let me give an example. So suppose you're looking at your robot from the top, then your wheel will look something like this. The wheel will look something like this. And when the wheel rolls, this is the direction in which your robot will move. When the wheel rotates in this direction, this is the center of the wheel. So the robot moves in this direction. Now, what if you want to move the robot in this particular direction? So if you have a traction wheel, the traction wheel will not allow you to move the robot in this particular direction. It will give you a lot of friction. You'll have to, literally drag the wheel over the rubber in order to, over the foam or over the floor in order to make the robot move sideways like this. These omni wheels allow you to do exactly that. They allow you to move sideways because they have these rollers on them. So what happens is when you try to move the robot sideways, these rollers start rotating and they reduce that friction, that sideways friction, and they allow the robot to move sideways. So that's the job of these omni wheels. Now, omni wheels are present in your Rev Robotics kit as well. So you'll be using these. This is a example of a wheelbase that has been made using 2 traction wheels and 2 omni wheels. So these 2 are the omni wheels, and these 2 in the back are the traction wheels. So using a combination of these, you can build your wheelbase. So we'll come to wheelbase designs a little later, where we'll see how do you combine these wheels with each other and what advantages do you get by it. So if you have questions around that, just hold on till that comes up. And the third category of wheels are called mecanum wheels. So mecanum wheels are a kind of omni wheels, but they're much more advanced in nature. And they not only allow your robot to move sideways. So if this is your robot, and this is the front, the forward direction. So omni wheels will only allow you to move in this direction. Mecanum wheels will allow you to move in any direction, and you have very good control over the direction in which the mecanum wheels take your robot. So these mecanum wheels are a modification of the omni wheels, but they're much more advanced in nature. So if you want to have real flexibility in your robot, then you use mecanum wheels. Again, these are used by advanced teams. Beginner teams usually do not use mecanum wheels. Yeah, go ahead.
So then why would people use omni wheels?
We'll come to that. We'll come to that when we talk about the wheelbase designs. All right, so hold your question till then. This is an example of a wheelbase that is using mechanism wheels. So you can see there are 4 mechanism wheels being used here, and these wheels are arranged in a certain pattern. So as we see here, the rollers of this particular wheel is in this direction, rollers are in this direction, and these rollers are like this. So there needs to be a certain pattern that needs to be followed when you use mechanism wheels on your wheelbase. So we'll talk more about the mechanism wheelbase a little later. Yeah.
So does this base use direct drive?
No, this doesn't use direct drive. So there is this motor here, and then what you see here is a gearbox. Inside this there are gears.
Correct.
So so this is a gear drive. This is not a direct drive. I can show you a direct drive picture. Okay, when we come to it, I'll show you. I have a few pictures. So this is another example of a geared drive. If you see here, so this is the shaft of the motor. This is your motor. And what you see here is a gear, the black gear. And there's another small black gear here behind the wheel. And then this is the shaft of that particular gear and the wheel. And this is your wheel. So the motor rotates this particular gear. This gear rotates this gear. And then this gear rotates this wheel. So this is a geared wheelbase.
So,
yes.
So in that photo that you were just showing like a while earlier, where you were explaining the gears. So that uses 2 traction wheels and 2 omni wheels, right?
Right.
Okay.
So why we do that, we'll come to that in a little while. Okay, now we'll talk about wheelbases. So what we saw till now were wheels and individual components of the wheelbase. Now we'll all bring them together and see what all combinations are typically used in FTC robots. Why do we use them? What are the advantages of one over the other, and so on. So we'll begin with a 2-wheel drive wheelbase. So this is a 2-wheel drive where your robot has only 2 wheels, as you can see in these pictures. And yeah, this is an example of a direct drive. What you see here, so this is your motor M. And this is the shaft of the motor that is directly connected to your wheel. So this is a direct drive wheelbase. Same here. This is your motor and directly connected to the wheel. Now, in a 2-wheel drive wheelbase, you can it's not hard to guess that this will be unstable. It cannot stand stable on 2 wheels. So if the robot is powered off, it will immediately fall down. So in order to make it stand on 2 wheels, you need to do extremely complicated programming here. And you need to build something called a self-balancing control system. So can someone tell me how come a human is able to stand on 2 feet when it is so complex?
So because we have a symmetric body and the center of gravity is exactly in the center.
So even these robots that you see here, they also have a symmetric body. There also central gravity is more or less in the center only. But still, they require a self-balancing control system, which is extremely complicated.
So friction?
Not really. See, so suppose you're standing on the ground and you start tilting towards one direction, then your body is able to automatically correct itself.
Something called a closed feedback loop. So inertia?
No, not really. So the human being also has a self-balancing control system built inside it. And that control system is inside your brain. So a human is actually a 2-wheel drive wheelbase. It's not wheels, actually, it's legs. So that's why human is called biped. Biped means 2 legs. And inside the brain, there is a self-balancing control system. And inside the human ear, there is a sensor that tells you the orientation of your body. And using that sensor's inputs, the human body is able to figure out whether it is tilting to one side or not. And if the body is tilting to one side, then all the muscles of the body, they act accordingly to straighten the body again. And this happens continuously, and it happens without our conscious knowledge. All this happens subconsciously. The brain does it on its own without telling us that the brain is doing so. And we have been doing it since our birth. So we all have gotten so used to it that we don't realize that we are doing it every moment. So in order to do something like that here, in this kind of a wheelbase, you need to have a special sensor. That's called an accelerometer. Plus, you need something called a gyroscope. So you need these two sensors in order to be able to understand that your bot is actually tilting and it may fall, so that the wheels can move accordingly and straighten it again. So these kind of sensors are used in this kind of wheelbases. Now for FTC, this becomes a little bit too complex. So no team uses two-wheel drive in FTC. This is an example of a three-wheel drive where there are two powered wheels. So this is one powered wheel that is powered by a motor. So the motor is hidden somewhere here. And this is the other wheel that is powered by another motor. And then there is a non-powered wheel over here. It's a small wheel. It's also called a caster. That just provides support so that the robot doesn't fall off. So this is a very common design. When you start building small robots, you use this kind of a design. In FTC, teams do not use this design as well. They go for a four-wheel drive wheelbase. This is another example of a three-wheel drive wheelbase. There are three wheels here on this wheelbase. It's triangular wheelbase. This is a four-wheel drive wheelbase that uses all four traction wheels. So all the four wheels here are traction wheels. There are no omni wheels here. The advantage of this kind of a wheelbase is it can go at very high speeds, and that is why this is used in RC cars. So if you have used a RC car, you will see that that has this kind of a wheelbase. Now these kind of wheelbases are not very precise in their movement. They have a lot of speed, but if you want to do very precise navigation with this, since these wheels are all traction wheels, it's not able to do that kind of navigation because there is absolutely no sideways movement possible using this kind of a wheelbase. So this is also something that most teams do not use in FTC, but there are some teams that even go for this as well. Now this is a two traction wheel plus two omni wheelbase. This is again a four-wheel drive wheelbase with two traction wheels and two omni wheels. So the traction wheels are these are traction wheels, and these are the omni wheels, and there's a fourth traction wheel in the back that you cannot see. This is the most popular wheelbase that is used in FTC, and most likely you would end up building this kind of a wheelbase. The advantage of this wheelbase is it not only gives you high traction because there are two traction wheels that are connected to two motors. So in this particular kind of a wheelbase, you have motors connected to the two traction wheels here and here, and your omni wheels are free to rotate. They don't have any motor in them. They are just mounted on a shaft. They are free to rotate anywhere they want to rotate. So the advantage of this wheelbase is you can have very good traction because you have two big traction wheels, and you also get the ability to move sideways because you have omni wheels on one side. These omni wheels allow sideways movement, because of which you can rotate your bot around a point. So for instance, if you have a bot like this, and you have these four wheels. This is again the top view of a bot. This is how it looks from the top. So these are traction wheels in the back, and these are omni wheels in the front. So and these traction wheels are the ones that are connected to motors. So in order to make this kind of a wheelbase move forward, so what you would do is you would move both these motors, this motor and this motor, in the same direction. So that will cause this entire wheelbase to move in the forward direction. So if both these motors move, say, clockwise, then that results in a motion in this direction. If both the motors rotate counterclockwise, then that will result in a motion in this direction because the wheels rotate in opposite directions, and then the entire wheelbase will move in this direction. Now, what if you want to turn this robot? So for instance, you want to make it turn either in this direction or you want to make it turn in this direction. So can anyone tell me, if I want to turn this particular wheelbase, what would I do to the two motors in order to make this particular wheelbase turn?
One will go clockwise and the other one will go anti-clockwise.
Correct. So that's correct. So what you would do is one of the motors you will run clockwise. So this particular motor, if you run it clockwise, and this motor, if you run it counterclockwise, what will happen is this particular wheel will try to take the robot in this direction, and this particular wheel will try to take the robot in this direction. And when this happens, then the entire robot starts turning in this direction. And these omni wheels that are present here in the front, they do not provide any resistance to this turning because they have these rollers on them. So these rollers, they allow this kind of a turning movement to happen. So this is how you build a
Sir,
two
I have a
traction
doubt.
omni wheelbase. Yeah, tell me.
Sir, sir, over here also the speed of motors would matter, sir. If they would be the same speed, then the robot would not move.
It would move actually. So let me show you. So think of this as your wheelbase, and so this is one wheel, and this is one wheel, and this wheel is rotating in. Sorry, this wheel is rotating in this direction, and this wheel is rotating in this direction. So what you're saying is the robot will not turn. That's what you're saying. So what will happen here is this if you join an imaginary line between the two wheels and take the center point of this line, so this center point becomes the center of your rotation. And the entire robot rotates around this center. This entire robot will rotate like
Oh,
this.
okay, sir. I understood.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So regarding the regarding the two wheel like the 2WD wheelbase, I mean sorry, the 3WD wheelbase. So is that system called closed feedback loop?
No, not really. We'll come to closed feedback loop when we talk about autonomous programming, but this has no connection to any kind of feedback loop.
Okay, so thank you.
Okay. We'll come to that when we talk about programming. So this is the most popular wheelbase. This is used by maybe 80% of the robots that are built for FTC. They use this kind of a wheelbase. To begin with, you should plan to build something like this only. This is an example of a similar wheelbase, but here instead of a direct drive, what we have here is a chain and a sprocket drive. So again, here we have two omni wheels. There is an omni wheel here. There's an omni wheel here in the front. There are two traction wheels. This is the traction wheel in the back. Another traction wheel in the back. This is a DC motor. This is a DC motor. And the way that this drivetrain has been arranged, this motor powers not just the traction wheel but also the omni wheel. It powers both. So if you see here, there is this chain that is running like this, and that goes around like this, and goes around like this. So the chain is running like this, and this particular motor is powering both the traction wheel as well as the omni wheel. Now the advantage of this approach is you're actually powering up all the four wheels. So what you get is a true four-wheel drive, and sometimes what happens is depending on what is there on the ground, there might be some obstacles on the ground, and if you end up stepping on those obstacles, what will happen is maybe one of your wheel will end up in the air. It will not be making contact on the ground for a little while. And if that wheel happens to be a traction wheel, and if the motor is connected to that wheel, then that motor will simply be running, and your robot will not be able to take advantage of that particular wheel. So that is why what this particular design has done is they have connected both the omni wheel and the traction wheel to the same motor. So in case what happens is there is an obstacle because of which this particular wheel gets lifted off the ground, then this motor will continue rotating the omni wheel. And if the omni wheel is still in contact with the ground, it will make the robot move forward. And then once you get over the obstacle, this traction wheel will again come back in contact with the ground, and then you will have all four wheels on the ground. So that is the advantage of having both these omni wheels and the traction wheels powered. So this is the next design that you can try. So once you've tried out this most popular design, this is the next design that you can try, where you power both the omni wheel and the traction wheel using some kind of a drivetrain. Here the drivetrain is your chain and sprocket. You could also use gears here if you want to. Now pulleys, I would not suggest you use pulleys. Like I said, the belt becomes loose after a little while and then starts slipping. So pulleys are not really suggested. In terms of comparison between gears and sprockets, I would prefer sprockets because sprockets interlock very well with the chain. Gears have very small tooth, and it's very easy for those tooths to go out of interlock with each other. So they may not be locking anymore. If suppose your robot gets banged up, it gets banged against another robot, your gears may get disturbed a little bit, and then your gears will not be in mesh with each other, and your drivetrain will stop transmitting power. So So in terms of comparing these various approaches that we saw, the simplest is the direct drive, and the best in terms of being resilient to bumping and damaging of the robot and having a long life is your chain and sprocket. So you should start with a direct drive and progress to a chain and sprocket drive. So any questions at this point?
No.
Okay, so moving on. This is a drivetrain that uses 4 Omni wheels. So now, sometime back, someone had asked the question, why do we need Omni wheels when we have Mecanum wheels? So we'll answer that question when we are discussing this. So here, what is happening is the wheels are arranged in a very unique pattern. So the wheels are not parallel to each other. If you look at them, the shafts of those wheels, they are actually perpendicular to each other. Unlike the other drivetrains that we saw, for example, this drivetrain, the axis on which the Omni wheels are rotating and the axis on which the traction wheels are rotating, those two axes are parallel to each other. But in this particular case, those two axes, so the axes that connect these two Omni wheels and the axes that connect these two Omni wheels, they are perpendicular to each other. So this is a very unique design, and the advantage of this design is, and all 4 wheels are powered, by the way. So there are motors that are connected in a direct drive fashion to all the 4 wheels. The advantage of this is you can make this particular wheelbase move in any direction. You can make it move in this direction or in this direction. In any direction, you can make it move. And before I explain it further, let me show you a small video that will make it all very clear. So if you have any questions, they'll all get answered by this video. So as you can see, the wheelbase is moving in all kinds of directions. So your robot is not turning. See, make a note of it. Your robot has never turned even a little bit, but your wheelbase is able to move in 4 directions. So this is the 3rd direction in which it's able to move, and then they'll show the 4th as well. So in this particular mode, you will see only 2 wheels are rotating. The other 2 wheels are not rotating. They're stationary. But since they have rollers on them, they do not provide any friction. So this is how this 4 Omni wheel drive works. So in principle, it looks fantastic. And since it has the capability to move in almost all directions, it seems to solve a lot of our problems, which which occur in our regular 4-wheel drives. But the big problem in this 4 Omni wheel drives is the robot is very unpredictable. The robot is not predictable at all, and it's very hard to control it. So when you are trying to control this kind of a bot with a gamepad and a match is going on, you'll not be able to precisely control the direction in which your bot is going, and the bot starts moving like crazy. Which is why even though few FTC teams end up using this, but none of the serious teams use this kind of a configuration. So this is how the 4 Omni wheelbase works. Now this is a 6-wheel drive wheelbase, and there is something unique about this wheelbase. There are 6 wheels here, and these wheels can move up and down as well. Besides rotating, these wheels can move up and down independent of each other, because they act like a suspension, just like you have a suspension in a car, for instance, that have springs that allow the wheels to move a little bit up and down. So suppose there is a small obstacle and the robot is going over the obstacle, then the wheel, when it goes over that particular obstacle, it can move up so that the rest of the robot remains at the same height, and only one particular wheel is able to move up. So for instance, if there is a small stone here in front of this wheel and the robot is moving in this direction, then what will happen is this particular suspension of the robot will lift this particular wheel a little up so that it is able to go over this obstacle. But all these other wheels will remain at the same height. So this entire platform that is there on the wheelbase, that doesn't lift vertically up. It doesn't lift vertically up. Only one particular wheel lifts vertically up and goes over the obstacle. So this is how a 6-wheel drive wheelbase works. Can someone give me examples of where this kind of a wheelbase is used?
Trucks?
No, not really. So trucks do have 6 wheels, But the reason why trucks have 6 wheels is because they need more traction on the ground. Because trucks are
Sir,
extremely heavy. Yes.
sir, which wheels are these?
So these are traction wheels.
Okay.
So has anyone seen videos of a moon rover or a Mars rover?
Yes, sir.
So those rovers, they have these kind of wheelbases. So they have 6 wheels, or some rovers even have 8 wheels. And each of these wheels have the ability to go up and down. So rovers use these kind of wheelbases, and so do these things called ATVs. So this is an all-terrain vehicle, ATV for short. I'm sure you must have driven one of these at some point or the other. And so here we see there are 6 wheels here. And if you see this particular wheel is higher than this wheel or this wheel. That is because there is a rock over here. So to go over this rock, this wheel has moved up, while the rest of the wheelbase remains at the same height. Only this wheel has gone up in order to go over the rock. So this leads to a very less bumpy ride for the driver. So the driver feels a very comfortable ride because of this up and down movement of the wheels. So this is a 6-wheel drive wheelbase. This is another picture of a FTC robot that uses a 6-wheel drive. All wheels are traction wheels. So this robot would have a hard time turning. But for some reason, this team decided to go ahead and use this particular kind of a wheelbase. Probably because they wanted a lot of traction. So this kind of a wheelbase gives you a lot of traction as well, because of the larger number of traction wheels. This is the last kind of wheelbase using mechanism wheels. A mechanism wheels can only be a 4-wheel drive wheelbase. It cannot be a 2-wheel or 3-wheel or 6-wheel. It has to be only 4-wheel drive. And that is because these mechanism wheels have to be arranged in a particular configuration. So these rollers, as you can see, are arranged like this. This roller is like this, this roller is like this, and this roller is like this. So if you look at this particular robot from the top, this robot from the top will look something like this. And this, the rollers on this wheel will be in this direction, the rollers on this wheel will be in this direction, the rollers on this wheel will be in this direction, and the rollers on this wheel will be in this direction. And they all form an X kind of a figure. This is the configuration in which mechanism wheelbases have to be built. And since this is the only configuration that works, you cannot have more than 4 wheels or less than 4 wheels. Now, the big advantage of mechanism wheelbase is you can not only, so if you remember, you saw the 4-wheel Omni wheelbase. So there are 4 Omni wheels here, 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 and here. And this particular wheelbase was able to go in these directions: 1, 2, 3, 4, and similarly 4 on the other side. So the 4-wheel Omni wheelbase can go in 8 directions. On the other hand, a mechanism wheelbase can go in any direction. This is a mechanism wheelbase. You have mechanism wheels here. This can not only go at 90 degrees or sideways or at 45 degrees. It can even go at 30 degrees. It can go at 37 degrees. It can go at 120 degrees. It can go in any angle that you want. That is a big advantage of mechanism wheels over Omni wheels. So the answer to the question that someone asked, why do we need Omni wheels when you have mechanism wheels, is because mechanism wheels are extremely hard to program. Extremely hard to program. You need to be a really good programmer if you want to program mechanism wheels. That is the reason most beginner teams do not use mechanism wheels. They use only Omni wheels. Omni wheels are very easy to program. But once you have reached a certain stage and your team has matured, you have spent a few years building robots, then you would want to move to a mechanism wheelbase and you would want to learn how to program these. So that's the difference between a mechanism wheelbase and an Omni wheelbase. So these are some pictures of the mechanism wheelbase in action. This is an FTC robot. As you can see that there are these 4 mechanism wheels, 1, 2, 3, and the 4th one is behind, you can't see it. And this is a pretty heavy robot. This robot, this is a robot built by one of my teams, and in terms of weight, it almost reached the weight limit of FTC. It's such a heavy robot. And the mechanism wheels allow this heavy robot to move in any direction. That's the big advantage of this. Okay, so this was all about how do we go ahead and build wheelbases. Now, all you learned today was, theoretical examples of the types of wheels, types of drivetrains, types of wheelbases, and so on. Now, the exercise that you need to do is actually get your hands dirty and build a real wheelbase. And for that, you'll need a kit. So as soon as your kit arrives, I would like all of you to do 2 exercises. And these are those exercises. So can all of you take a screenshot of this particular screen so that you get this URL? I'll always also share this URL with Meenal and she can share with all of you, but I would still suggest take a screenshot of the screen and go to this URL. And at this URL, you will find many FTC training resources that I have collected. I'll just show you what all is there. So there is something called a tutorial 1 mini bot. So if you go in this particular folder, there are some videos here, the minibot videos, and there is a PDF guide on how to build the minibot. So that PDF guide looks something like this. This is by Rev Robotics, and what you would be doing is you would be building a small robot like this that looks like this, with 4 traction wheels and a geared wheel drive and 4 DC motors and the control hub. So you'll be building something like this. So this is a assembly guide for doing that. It's a very detailed guide. It tells you what all parts you need, what all tools you need, and how do you go about it. Step by step, everything is explained. So this is the first exercise that you should be doing. Build this kind of this robot that will set you up for building more complex robots. So I would like all of you to do this exercise as soon as you get your kit. And once you're done with this, there is another guide over there called Basic Bot Guide. So this builds a little bit more complicated robot. So once you're done with the mini bot, you should build this basic bot. And once you're done with both of these two, then you would be ready to build the bot that would play the game for this season. So these are the 2 exercises I would like you to do, and they're all available here on this Google Drive that I shared. And these presentations that I'm showing you in all these sessions, those also I have shared over here. Plus, there is a document on various FTC resources. So that document is also present here, and you can refer to that document if you want to look at any more information. So I put a lot of links in that document. So take a screenshot of this, and this will give you all the information that you need for the next couple of months at least to get started on building the robot. All right. Any questions until this point before we begin our knowledge game?
Sir?
Yes.
Sir? Sir, so do we have to buy the kits on our own, or will like school be providing? So because we have a team. So
Meenal, what is the plan? Can you answer this question? Okay, looks like Meenal is not here, but I think it will be provided from your school as far as I know. But you should check with Meenal ma'am. She will be able to give you the exact information.
Yes, sir. So because we have this doubts about FRC, FTC. Once that's cleared, we'll get the kit because we already have our team ready.
Right. So speak to Meenal ma'am. She'll be able to answer all these questions for you. Any other questions? Okay, so let's move on to our knowledge game. This is the website that you need to go to, kahoot.it. So all of you, please head over to this website. And those of you who are attending for the first time, this particular game is played on an online platform called Kahoot. So you'll have to go to this particular website, and over there, you'll have to enter a certain PIN number, and you have to enter your name, and then the game will start. And if you have a separate device, a second device with you, then I would suggest that you play this game on that second device rather than playing it on the device on which you're watching this presentation. And the reason is because the questions would be shown on this screen, on my screen, and and you can answer those questions on your other device on which you have gone to this website. So if you have 2 devices, bring a second device and start using it. If you have only 1 device, then you can still use it. You'll have to just keep switching between your browser that is open this website and between this presentation. All right, so has everyone taken a note of this? I'll move over to Kahoot and we'll start the game.
So what is the password that we have to game it over?
Yes, this is the pin 6903434. So after you're joined, make sure your name is visible on the screen here. Okay, we'll start now. Is anyone in the process of joining and not joined yet? Let me know. So I'll wait for a few more seconds. Otherwise, we'll get started. Okay, so looks like we have 20 people playing the game. We'll start now. So the way this game progresses is you'll get a question on the screen and you have to answer the question by choosing the correct answer on your device, on your mobile device. So the question is, what is the effective range of proximity sensors? Is it a few meters, a few centimeters, a few millimeters, or a few kilometers? So yes, most of you have got it right. It is a few centimeters. Proximity sensors do not have a lot of range. They work only between maybe 2-3 centimeters or 5 to 10 centimeters. Beyond that, proximity sensors do not work. And that is what is the meaning of proximity. You need to be near the sensor. I see a few people said a few meters. 6 people actually said that. So a few meters is actually the range of a distance sensor and not that of a proximity sensor. Okay, so that was our first question. I hope if there is anyone new today, they would have understood how to play this game. If you have any doubts, please ask. Let's take a look at the leaderboard after this first question. So we have Eklavya at 948 points, closely followed by Ninad and Rhea and Rishi and Sanyukta as well. So these are the top 5 players. If your name is not here in the top 5, don't worry. As you score more points, your name will start appearing here. And if you're wondering why the scores of these people are different, that's because Eklavya was the first one to answer it. And the faster that you answer, the more number of points that you get. So if you know the answer, then don't keep on waiting to answer. Immediately select your correct answer. So let's move on to the next question. Which of the following uses the same principle as distance sensors? So I should get 100% correct answer on this because we had talked about it and everyone seemed to know the answer. This should be a very easy question. We need to see who answered it the fastest because that person would have got the most number of points. Okay, there is one person who got it wrong. So it's actually bats. Yes, so bats use the same principle as distance sensors. They use ultrasonic waves, and when the waves reflect back, they're able to identify an obstacle. Let's look at the leaderboard. Eklavya continues to be at the top, and there are a few changes.
Somebody just kicked me out of the meeting.
Sorry? Was there a question? Okay, let's move to the next question. The wheelbase consists of chassis, wheels, motors, and what else? Take your time to answer this. Don't be in a hurry. You have 30 seconds to answer this. So 11 people got it right. It is all the above. In a wheelbase, you have a drivetrain that consists of gears, sprockets, and chains. So the correct answer is all of the above. I see a lot of people answered just gears. That's probably because you didn't read the rest of the options. So read all the 4 options carefully and see if there is an all of the above option in them and see if it is a valid option. Looking at the leaderboard, let's look at who has moved up and who has moved down. Eklavya continues to lead, and we have some new players in the leaderboard. And I see Kyra with a winning streak of 3 correct answers in a row. So good job, Kyra. Keep on doing that and you will reach the leaderboard. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following wheels is not legal for FTC? Take your time. Read all your options before you answer. So 16 people answered correctly. It is none of the above because they're all legal. Traction wheels are legal, mechanism wheels are legal, omni wheels are legal. But I do see a few people selecting traction wheels and omni wheels. So they are legal. All 3 types of wheels are legal in FTC. Now let's see the leaderboard at the end of this particular question. Okay, so we have a new person on the top. Ninad has moved to the top and Eklavya has moved a little bit down. And Vivan is the highest climber with climbing 3 places with this particular one question. So well done, Vivan, and Eklavya, work harder. You probably got this answer wrong while the rest of them got it right. So they're all in the 3000s. So let's move on to the next question. Question number 5. This is a true or false questions. So omni wheels allow sideways movements, true or false? Very easy question. You have to answer fast. The correct answer is true, and I still see 5 people answered false. So omni wheels are those wheels that have those little rollers on them, and because of those rollers, those omni wheels are able to move sideways as well. So the correct answer is true. Yes, omni wheels do allow sideways movement. Let's look at the leaderboard now. So Ninad continues his lead, but Neil is slowly catching up, and there is a very small margin between them. And Moksh is the highest climber in this round, up 4 places. So well done, Moksh. And let's see if there are some new names in the leaderboard with our next question. So here comes the next question. Question number 6. Which is the most popular wheelbase for FTC robots? So most of you got it right, except for 2 people. Yes, the 2 traction wheel plus 2 omni wheel wheelbase is the most popular wheelbase for FTC robots. Almost 75 to 80% of the robots use this kind of a wheelbase. And to begin with, this is the kind of wheelbase I would recommend all of you to build as well. So moving on to the leaderboard, let's see if there are some new names. So Ninad continues his lead. Samyukta is a new name in the leaderboard. She's closely followed by Kyra, Mahip, and Neil, who are close behind Ninad. So moving on to question number 7. Which of the following wheelbase designs require a self-balancing control system? Again, a very easy question. We discussed a lot about it. We saw some nice pictures. Should be easy to answer. Yes, the 2-wheel drive is the one that requires a self-balancing control system because without it, the robot would simply topple. That's the correct answer. Let's look at the leaderboard now. Ninad continues the lead. Sanyukta is slowly rising up. She's at number 4 right now. Let's see what happens with question number 8. What kind of wheelbase is suitable for a Mars rover robot? Yes, most of you got it right. It is a 6-wheel wheelbase with a flexible suspension so that those wheels can go over obstacles without toppling the rover. So that is the one that is most suitable for rovers on the Mars, on the Moon, and for all-terrain vehicles. So that's the correct answer. Let's look at the leaderboard after question number 8. Ninad continues the lead, and Rhea has climbed up a little bit from position 5 to position 4. So well done, Rhea. And Meher is back with an answer streak of 3. So well done, Meher, as well. Let's make some difference in the next question. So 2 more questions are remaining, question number 9 and 10. Let's see if Neil or Mahib can displace Ninad from the number 1 position. So Neil and Mahib, be ready, answer fast and answer correctly. Here comes question number 9. Which of the following wheelbases is the hardest to control by a driver? Think carefully and then answer. So we talked about a wheelbase that is very unpredictable, very hard to control by a driver, and it goes haywire if you try to move it fast. So we are talking about that kind of a wheelbase. So of these 4 options, which wheelbase is that? So the correct answer is 4 Omni wheels. Yes. I see a lot of people selected option number 4, 4 mechanism wheels. So that is not correct. Mechanism wheels are not the hardest to control. It's the Omni wheels that are hardest to control. And talking about mechanism wheels are the hardest to program. So that's the difference between them. Omni wheels, 4 Omni wheels, hardest to control, 4 mechanism wheels, hardest to program. And there's a big difference between them. So the correct answer is 4 Omni wheels, option number 3. Let's look at the leaderboard after question number 9. So Ninad has been overtaken by Rhea. Congratulations, Rhea. You are at the top now. But both Ninad and Neil and Sanyukta and Mahib, all 4 of them are close behind. We have 1 question left. Rhea, if you can maintain your lead, you will be the winner. Ninad, Neil, Sanyukta, Mahib, if you can answer this question correctly and very fast, you can definitely displace Rhea and come to the top. So guys, last question coming up. Be ready and be fast to answer. So here's question number 10. Which of the following wheelbases is the hardest to program? So I shouldn't have answered this as part of my last question. I didn't realize that this was another question. So I literally gave away the answer in the previous question, and now it will all depend on how fast you all were able to answer this. That would determine who is the winner. So yes, mechanism wheelbase is the hardest to program. Omni wheelbases are the hardest to control. And that brings us to the end of the quiz. And now we'll take a look at the scores and take a look at who are the winners. So at number 3, we have Samyukta with 8409 points. Number 2, Rhea. So Rhea got displaced. Let's see who displaced Rhea. Okay, it's Ninad back in the game. So congratulations, Ninad. With 8,518 points, you are the winner. And Neil and Mahib are the runners-up. So with this, we come to an end of today's session.
Someone removed me from the call like before we got done. They just removed me from the call.
Who is this? Who got removed?
Same, somebody removed me from the meeting before also.
Hey, come on, guys! This is bad. If someone is doing this deliberately just to win the game, this is really bad.
That's why, I came down.
What happened? What happened?
Somebody removed me from the
call. They said someone has removed you from the call. Rejoin or. But I don't think. Do you guys have the access to remove anybody?
It's not possible because there are only 4 presenters.
Yeah, but those 4 presenters are also students.
Presenters can remove people.
Only presenters can have the rights. So I don't think, but let me look into it. And henceforth, then those rights only one person will have.
Someone removed me from the meeting the first session as well, I think.
Who is this?
before the last question came on, it just said, I mean, for the options came, it just said someone removed you from the call.
Yeah, and the second question, somebody removed me as well.
So we'll have a look at it. Sorry about that. And as I said, only presenters can do that. So I'm surprised it happened, but let me check on this now again. And yeah, next time we'll be careful about it.
Also, Meena, miss.
Yeah.
Mr. Shiv and I, we have a group already. So
So we will after this call, you guys call me and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, great. Okay, yes, miss.
Anybody else has any questions?
Mr. Team can have how many people?
Sorry.
Mr.
So we'll
Team can
about
have
DIS FTC team. We'll talk about it later because the school is still deciding on what is happening. But the one thing that they clear is only people who have done the robotics curriculum, because there's so much demand. Only those who have done it will be a part of it this year.
Miss.
Yeah.
Miss in the vacations, right? Miss in May and
Yes.
June.
Yes. We'll the Ambani questions we'll talk later. Anything related to this class today, and then we can have a separate meeting with students who are basically wanting any clarifications for Ambani. But right now for this class, any questions?
Also, miss, you can download the attendance list instead of asking on the group.
Okay.
There's an option here. If you click on participants, there's an option called download. There are 3 dots. If you click on that, there's an option called download attendance list.
So maybe I don't get it because I don't see that.
No, whoever created the meeting will get that.
Okay. Yeah. So those kids give me. Yeah. So they give me, but I just thought I'll ask here also.
So we'll discuss about the DIS team afterwards.
Yeah. Right now, I only want questions about people about today's class. Any questions? Cool. So yeah, Yash, you have a question. Is that what you have raised your hands? Can you want to talk about it?
No, miss.
Okay, Viraj, you have a question? Okay, anybody, any other questions? Cool. So we will see you again and I'll come back to you for the next class. And it was nice to have you over. Sumesh, can I talk to you for 2 minutes after this? Like on the phone itself? Yeah, so after everybody leaves, then we can just have a quick chat.
Sure.
Thank you, miss.
You're welcome.
So all the people who have a doubt related to DAI should stay in this call, right?
No, they have to leave and we'll have a separate call. Like after this, like we'll schedule a time and have a call on the group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, miss. Bye, miss. Thank you.
Miss,
Okay, miss. Okay, so thank you.
Miss,
yeah, beta.
Which is the DAIS? Miss,
Sorry?
which is the DAIS group? Miss, which is the DAIS group?
You are a part of DIS?
Yes, miss, I am.
So I will give you the details. I'll send them to you. Get in touch with Shiv Kiri and he'll put you on to that. Which grade are you from?
Miss, I'm 8th.
Yeah, so you know Shiv, ask him, he'll put you onto the group.
Okay, miss. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Udant, from Hillspring also we have a question. Hello, Udant.
Yes, miss.
From Hillspring also I had a few questions and I wanted to sit with you guys. So I've told Devaria to fix a time and we can then plan the outreach and stuff like that. So just tell me, get back to me. Similarly for BIS also. Okay, bye. See you. Hi, Sumesh. I think everyone's left. Sorry about this.
Yes,
These kids have all kinds of questions, you know, and DIS, where there's so much demand, I can't tell you. Some 50 people want to be on the team.
Yeah, no.
So I'm facing, sorry.
Recording is still on. You can stop it. We don't require any more recording. Hello, Meena, are you there? Hello. Hello.
Sorry, myself.